Hello chess friends and welcome to Zladov's Chess channel and welcome back to the new In Chess Classic tournament in 2021. We have reached now the final stage, and of course in the finals we have the super match between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen. So we're covering now the game 4 from the day 1. The first 3 games ended like this. The first 2 games ended in a draw, and then Magnus Carlsen in the game 3 pulled off really some wild tactics, won the game with a great endgame, with a great endgame strategy. Now in the game 4 it was simply time for Hikaru to make something happen in order to make an equal result after the day 1, then maybe to go more calm into the day 2. Let's check out now what happened. I think it was a very incredible game, and I think this will be also a very instructive game in some Slav defense ideas. So here d4 played by Hikaru Nakamura, d5, c4, c4, c6 here by Magnus Carlsen, the Slav defense. After the move knight to f3, we have knight to f6, and now here Hikaru goes with the normal line with the move e3. It's the so-called quiet line, and it's really one of the lines that I don't like to play here from White's perspective, because what we can notice now immediately that the bishop on the c1 is blocked out by its own pawn. So that's why Magnus plays here now a very interesting idea. He plays simply bishop to g4, pinning the knight. If he tries here something like queen to b3, it's I think not such a huge problem here. We can play queen to b6, and after queen takes b6, a takes b6, you could maybe recapture this pawn. But the problem is now black doesn't have to weaken the pawn structure by taking with the pawn. Still we have the opportunity to play knight to d5. So that's why as I said, I simply don't like somehow this quiet line. I like to play, when I play against a Slav, the 3 knights variation. There are also many complicated lines. So that said, after move e3, here Magnus Carlsen immediately plays a bishop to g4, h3, and now bishop to f3. Now after queen to f3, Magnus builds now a firm pawn structure on light squares, because we have given up our light square bishop. So it means now we should protect that squares by pushing some pawns on light squares. So that's why here we have a very nice firm setup in the center. So far the light squares are protected, and we can notice now that still the bishop on c1 is a very bad piece. So bishop to d3 here played by Hikaru, knight to d7 by Magnus. We have castling, bishop to d6 here. Magnus is already preparing the breakthrough with the move e5. It's I think also a common idea, a common strategy in Slav defense setups. Also White could prepare something like knight to c3 and then e4, so the game could be dynamic in the center of the board. Really then some pawn storms could happen, then maybe also so many trades of pieces, and if the position gets opened, then again I think White could have a pleasant game with the bishop pair. Here in the continuation, Hikaru tried knight to c3, castling. We have rook to d1, and now rook to e8 played by Magnus Carlsen, queen to e2, and this was maybe sort of a slight inaccuracy here by Hikaru, getting the queen where the rook already is. So he's getting the queen on the file of the rook, and now Magnus uses this moment, immediately plays queen to e7, and now after bishop to d2, you see now Hikaru has finished his opening. He has developed all of his minor pieces, has now connected rooks. Magnus has also connected rooks, but now Magnus plays simply d takes c4. It's a normal idea, because what we want to do here after bishop to c4 now to break through with the move e5. The problem is now if you don't react, you vulnerable of course to some e-file attacks, and you could maybe protect the queen on e2, but you risk always this idea, e takes d4, and then after e takes d4 you could be left with an isolated pawn. So it's not such a good pawn structure then in the continuation. So that's why here Hikaru has to react, d takes e5, and now queen to e5 comes already with a very dangerous threat here to play the move queen to h2. So here Hikaru has to react at g3. It's nothing wrong with this move, because still it's a great position for White, because still we can protect our light squares here. The bishop still can maybe get back here to f1 or maybe to g2, then we can still protect our light squares. But here Magnus is not allowing this bishop, now this bishop on c4, to breathe, play simply b5. It's a great idea, bishop to b3. So you see this bishop would love to come, I think, here to g2, and then maybe we could play on a minority attack. And minority attack would be simply 2 versus 3 situation, getting of course the use of this long diagonal of the light square bishop, and then I think White could have a pleasant game. But Magnus is not allowing that to play simply against the bishop a5, simply pushing further, also threatening now to move a4. In the continuation, bishop to c2 here by Hikaru. Although this is still a good diagonal for the light square bishop, but I would love simply to have this light square bishop here. I think it would be much much better after move bishop to c2. Here queen to e6 by Magnus, king to g2. So you see now Magnus with this simple threat ideas forces now the king to come on an unnatural square. The king of course can be protected by the bishop, by the queen on light squares, but still this bishop, as we said, I would love to have this bishop on g2. So here a4 by Magnus. Now he's threatening also the move b4 here. That's why Hikaru tried now to move a3, knight to e5, and now bishop to b1. Hikaru is trying to now find some other good diagonals on the board for the light square bishop, because there is also a very positional threat here by Magnus Carlsen to fix the knight around the square c4. If this knight comes on c4, it's such a powerful knight. Then we could maybe search some ideas how to improve this knight, maybe with some knight to d7, knight to b6, and then we could have a compact position. You see with the knight on b6, we would have a great protection of this knight on c4. So that's why bishop to b1. Again, you see with the simple threat, Magnus Carlsen is forcing Hikaru Nakamura to do something. Queen to e7, now bishop to e1. It's not of course the best setup of bishops here, both of the bishops on the back rank, and now Magnus simply plays rook from a to d8. Here he simply of course getting use of now all of the only open file on the board. Maybe knight to c4 would be here an opportunity. Then maybe after something like bishop to e1, here to try to maybe break the position with the move h5 h4. Then if g4 happens, then we could maybe try again our queen and bishop battery on dark square. So maybe with the move h5 black could have also a great attack. But as I said, here bishop to b1, queen to e7, a slightly passive move here by Magnus Carlsen. As I said, maybe not the best of moves here. Bishop to e1, now rook to d8, and now after the move bishop to a2, here finally, but really finally, Hikaru Nakamura developed the bishop where it belongs. Simply, I think this is now a good diagonal for Hikaru's bishops, like for bishop here after move knight from e to d7. Again, Magnus is trying maybe to find some new good squares on the board, maybe something like knight to c5, and then cement one of these knights around the square e4. So the knight on e4 would be then very dangerous if black manages to push the knight on e4. Then f3 would be very risky, because with the bishop's activity here, you could be vulnerable around the square g3. So as I said, knight to e4 seems like a great outpost for the knight in the game. Queen to c2 played by Hikaru, and now bishop to e5 by Magnus, rook from a to c1, and now comes this idea, knight to c5. Here, knight to e2 played by Hikaru. He's trying now to compete, I think, on the d file. A good strategy would be, I think, here for white, simply to trade off more rooks, trade off more pieces, maybe even the queens off the board, and then to go maybe into a bishop versus knight middle game, because we have now pawns on both sides. So the bishop love this kind of endgames. If you could just imagine, maybe here the pawn structure, 3 versus 3 queen pawns and 3 king pawns here, and here a 4 versus 2 here situation. So I think with the bishop pair, white would have really a dominant position with opportunities to attack maybe somehow this backward pawn on c6. So as I said, trading off the rooks, as I said, seems like a natural idea here. Rook to d1, because there are always some here opportunities maybe to further attack the c5 knight, so also the c6 king. So that's why here Magnus reacted with the move queen to a7, and now rook to c1. And it wasn't simply the best of moves again by Hikaru. He should have simply played knight to g1. That's at least here the suggested move by the engine, and I think this move gives us again new attacking opportunities. Knight to f3 here, simply kicking away this annoying, really annoying bishop. This bishop is attacking always the b2 pawn. We cannot move the queen. We cannot. We don't want, of course, to trade off more pieces with bishop to c3. Then you don't have any more the strength of the bishop here. Then white could maybe go something like knight to e4 finally, but now knight to f3. At least we would kick away this bishop from the attack. If you want to maybe protect it, I think we can immediately take after queen to e5. Now we could at least take out this pawn, and if Magnus wants to take, I think still this is a risky choice, because the b5 is also weak, then also the a4 pawn. So meanwhile, white can regroup and maybe attack also this pawn. There are always also some back rank problems. If something gets traded around the square e4, then rook to d8 could happen. So still Magnus also needs to lose maybe one tempo in order to secure the king by playing h6 or maybe even g6. So here, as we said, rook to c1, it seems like a great counter attack playing against the knight, but now here Magnus plays simply knight to e6. The problem is now, if you take out here this pawn on c6, then we simply take out here the pawn on b2, and that's actually what Magnus Carlsen main threat is, here the weak pawn on b2. In the continuation here, instead of this rook to c1, maybe finally, as we said, maybe something like bishop to c3, getting rid of this very annoying bishop, because we didn't play knight to g1 in the first place. Now finally, maybe after bishop to c3, maybe knight to c3, at least we have a protection of the e4, and then trying maybe to activate our bishop. Still we have, of course, the attack on the d file, so I think it's a playable game for Hikaru. But with the move rook to c1, Magnus doesn't have to retreat, as we said. He doesn't have to protect the c6 pawn. Now Hikaru plays f3. Again, not the best of moves. You see this pawn structure is really weird. You have 4 pawns on the third rank, so of course these are not so good pawns. They are not fixed, they can be attacked. It's of course a great protection so far, but in long terms it could be a weakness, and you see now how this pawn structure in front of the king will cause Hikaru Nakamura many trouble here. After the move knight to d5, here queen takes c6 played by Hikaru, but now Magnus has also the opportunity to take out this pawn. Knight takes e3, we have king to h1, and now queen to b8 by Magnus. We have bishop to f2, bishop takes b2. You see again this problem of this b2 pawn. Hikaru Nakamura didn't compete on dark squares. Here we have bishop to e3, and now Magnus simply takes out the rook. But here, after bishop takes c1, it's obvious that white is still has this bishop pair for the rook. But of course, Magnus Carlsen has this move, rook to c8. Maybe here queen to c8 is slightly better, because when we are playing with the rook against a bishop and a knight, maybe, then it's good to trade off the queens off the board. We want to simplify this position. After potential rook to queen takes c8, rook to c8, at least we would threat here something like rook to c2, and maybe grab also the bishop here on the second rank, and also the knight would be attacked. So you would be forced basically to give up your bishop pair with the move bishop to e6, and then after f takes e6, still black is much better, because black can create here a pass pawn with the move b4, and then maybe the a pawn would be very dangerous. So I think it's a much better continuation for white. So as we said, rook to c8 here by Magnus, we have queen to e4, queen to d6, and now bishop to e3 by Hikaru, queen to d1. You see now how weird this pawn structure is. You have to move your king here to the second rank or cover like this, knight to g1, and now Magnus simply again forces a trade of queens. Hikaru doesn't react. He had played queen to d5. As we said, maybe queen takes c2 slightly better, rook takes c2, but as we said, it's simply much better. Again, black would be forced to play bishop to e6, f takes e6. A similar position would appear, but now we can, as we said, create a pass pawn. That's the most important thing. The king is cut off by the rook activity, so after move queen to d5, here Magnus Carlsen simply played rook to d8, and in this position Hikaru Nakamura resigned. What's the problem of this particular line? The problem is, of course, you cannot protect anymore your bishop. You have to move the queen from the protection of the bishop, and in this position Hikaru, as we said, resigned. So great game here by the world champion. Also in the game 3, outstanding chess by Magnus Carlsen. He is now the deserved leader of the super final after the day 1. Still, of course, Hikaru Nakamura has great chances, because we have seen, I think, in the past year that Hikaru Nakamura won one game when he lost the first day against Magnus Carlsen. So still he has opportunities, I think, against Magnus. This wasn't simply Hikaru's day. Against Shakril Mamedjarov, Hikaru Nakamura had a great day, but also a bad day. Then managed to win the semifinals with the great Armageddon game. So it's nothing lost, I think, for Hikaru. Still, he can make it, I think, and maybe spice things up in the super final. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting lines of the Slav defense. If you want to see more games from this tournament, here are some games that we have covered before. Some great games from this very nice tournament. I think we had a great performance by many players. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games from the past, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link with some great games by Mikhail Tal, Garry Kasparov, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.